I'm speaking with Dennis Trainor Jr., an actor, writer, and associate professor of theater at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, as he just mentioned. His new solo show is The Tao of Lloyd. It's happening this Saturday at Western Avenue Studios and Lofts in Lowell before it goes to Edinburgh Festival Fringe. In Cameron Crowe's 1989 film Say Anything, Lloyd Dobler is 19, fresh out of high school, and staring down adulthood with no tidy career plan and no interest in selling out. What he does have is one very open heart.
I don't want to sell anything, buy anything, or process anything as a career. I don't want to sell anything bought or processed, or buy anything sold or processed, or process anything sold, bought, or processed, or repair anything sold, bought, or processed. You know, as a career, I don't want to do that.
For Gen X, Lloyd, as played by John Cusack, became a patron saint of sincerity, especially in the scene everyone remembers, him standing beneath Diane Court's window, holding a boombox over his head, and trying to reach the girl he loves the only way he knows how.
In your eyes, the light, the heat, I am complete. See the doorway, the 1,000 churches.
So what became of that earnest young man? Actor and writer Dennis Trainor Jr. imagines Lloyd decades later, older, grayer, and still refusing the program. His new solo show, The Tao of Lloyd, turns that Gen X idealism into a spiritual survival guide in an era of political collapse, cultural burnout, and late-stage everything.
Hey, I'm Lloyd Dobler. Yeah, the guy with the boombox from Say Anything. I grew up. America didn't. So I'm here as your resident Zen punk dissident with a sorta-kinda guided meditation that is your spiritual Molotov cocktail to help you survive late stage everything. Are you with me?
Dennis Trainor Jr. will perform a workshop version of The Tao of Lloyd on Saturday at Western Avenue Studios and Lofts in Lowell. That's before he takes the show to the famed Edinburgh Festival Fringe in Scotland, August 6th through the 30th. Dennis Trainor joins us now to talk about it all. Welcome to the Culture Show. It's great to have you here.
Jared, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, what made you think about Lloyd Dobler and 40 years later what he might be thinking?
Yeah, for me, the Tao of Lloyd is for the spiritually curious, the politically furious, people who are algorithmically kind of overstimulated and who just can't pretend anymore that everything's okay or that another Joe Biden Democrat getting elected is going to save the day. So it's hosted by Lloyd Dobler, who I imagine as someone a little bit older, a little bit grayer for the radio people listening. That's who I am. Who is, again, offering these sort of kind of spiritual meditations to help us survive late stage everything. He says, using a spiritual Molotov cocktail to throw at the Overton window so that we can reimagine what is possible for the future. So it's earnest, but it's funny because he's not so good at the spirituality stuff.
Well, you point out something so key here, because you've done this in your podcast in addition to the show that you're about to launch, and that he is Gen X. And Gen X had a prism into what was possible.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm at the tail end of Gen X, we saw a world that for a long time went along pretty smoothly, and where it seemed like the boomers were doing things right, and these were the people who were doing the protesting that so many people want to see happen now. So it gives him a view of what could have been.
Yeah, I think Lloyd would say, and Dennis might say as well, that the boomers, before they were boomers, were hippies, and the hippies almost won. I mean, we were maybe one or two naked drum circles away from actually giving peace a chance, you know, but then Robert Kennedy was shot, and Martin Luther King was shot, and Malcolm X was shot, and John F. Kennedy was shot, and RFK was shot, and then, you know, to usher in the era of Ronald Reagan, John Lennon was killed, and then the hippies put their tails between their legs, and they became boomers, and we've been experiencing, Gen Xers, a kind of trickle-down trauma for the past 40 years, wherein, you know, we can say that Trump is a kind of cancer on American politics, but, you know, Obama bailed out the banks and the people got sold out. Bill Clinton was Bill Clinton. We went to war under Bush based on lies. So things for people my age have been getting worse since Lloyd said he didn't want to buy, sell, or process anything. So the refusal end of that is certainly understandable, but we need something. We can't just be against anything. We have to figure out what we're for. So that's the kind of razor's edge that both the podcast and the show are trying to negotiate.
And so we talked about what came before Gen X, but millennials come after. So where does Lloyd and Gen X stand in that sandwich about who and what is on the other side?
Yeah, hopefully Lloyd's smart enough to know that with the wisdom of age, he's kind of touched some experiences through which he can learn. But he's old enough to realize that he can't be the leader, or he can't be, as a cis white man, the kind of avatar of some kind of movement, that he can gather people together, harness some energy, and kind of get the hell out of the way, which could be a note for some people in the older generation as well.
So why say anything? Of course, that's one of a string of 80s movies, and John Cusack, of course, an icon of that era. Obviously, we know what he stands for, and that's a big part of the character, I would assume. But did you scrutinize some of the other ones before really landing on why this one resonated so much?
The honest answer is no. This idea has been bouncing around in my head for so many years before I finally launched the podcast just about a year ago this week. And it always seems so impractical. I mean, I remember being at a family gathering last summer, and my brothers were saying, "So you launched a podcast about, Lloyd Dobler, and he's trying to go through the Tao Te Ching and help us." And I said, "Yeah, it's a niche little audience. I understand, but I have to. For whatever reason, I had to do it. It was just something that was got me creatively. So I didn't market test this. I didn't go through that whole thing. But the producer who I worked with last time at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival became a fan early on and has been a great supporter and been encouraging me to take it beyond the podcast and develop it into a solo show.
Well, let's kind of walk through that, because before you did this, you did Manifest Destiny's Child at Edinburgh Fringe. Also political in nature. What were you examining there? So
Manifest Destiny's Child was largely a disappointment to the marketing department, not a show about Beyonce.
Yeah.
It was a show. It was the end of a long bit of phrasing that I used to use to critique U.S. foreign policy that went something like U.S. foreign policy is a blowback-inducing homicidal bull in a cultural, religious, and geopolitical China shop. Manifest Destiny's Child. It was a critique of American exceptionalism, both here at home, starting from the founding and the expanding westward, and then how that manifested in our foreign policy. But as an activist in around 2016, right after Trump got elected the first time, before he took office, there was a massive protest out at Standing Rock, in which I was part of as an ally and a storyteller. I had a camera, and it's part of what I used to do as YouTube. And I learned very quickly there through training.
That was about oil. It was about
stopping the oil pipeline. Yeah, and it was a massive months-long encampment of this place that didn't even exist on Google Maps, and yet over 500 indigenous tribes came together, and an overwhelming number of many white allies who maybe some of us were kind of in the way. One of the things I learned in the media orientation there, Johnny Asseron, who was an indigenous leader, said to me, he said, "We thank you, white people, for being here, but please, if you're going to help us, just know there's not going to be a parade in your honor. This is not Dances with Wolves, and you are not Kevin Costner." So Manifest Destiny's Child, the play, was a memoir play that examine my own privilege. I could be against U.S. foreign policy, but as a cis white male, I'm also benefiting from those same policies that I'm critiquing. So the play it was a true story about my time behind the front lines of U.S. presidential politics. I was Jill Stein's campaign manager and communications director in the 2016 presidential race. But before that was a whole 10-year period where I was engaged in activism with Occupy Wall Street and other media creating events. So it was a kind of an hour-long investigation into that period of my life.
Well, you're already an actor, but how did you see the theater in this format is a great way to, one, marinate your ideas, and also to get them a different way other than a podcast or a radio show or punditry on the television talk shows at night, to get your discussion out there?
So I did the punditry thing. Actually, I had a show called Acronym TV, which means what do you stand for? So there's a little nugget there for the pun people. And what I found as a theater, and I was away from theater for all this time before I came back to it. And what I find with theater is that you literally are changing the air in the room with the people that you're sharing the room in. And it became a quality versus quantity. So yes, with a YouTube show that's successful, you can reach a lot of people, but how many of those engagements are real and how many swipe through? When you're on stage, you know if your audience is with you or not. And for me, that was my first love. That was what I was trained in. And I went away from it for a good decade or so, chasing all this activism stuff, which was is important. I don't regret that, but I'm happy to have found my way back into a Boston theater community where I'm still actively engaged in doing a couple of shows a year and teaching at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. So the reason I want to do it as a theater show is because I haven't market tested this, but that's where I feel most at home. That's where I feel most alive and where I can leverage my talents as a storyteller.